Hi, everybody. Welcome to a very special edition of the Country Music Time Machine. We are covering the 1950s in country music history. Hi, everybody. This is your host, Kevin, and this is a place where we just love country music and especially country music history. Many folks consider the 1950s to be the golden age of country music. And in this episode, we're going to run down many facts and great artists of the time that support this. On the Country Music Time Machine, our most viewed decade is the 1950s. We have so many viewers of these episodes of the 1950s, it's incredible. We could probably fill up a Kenny Chesney concert venue a couple of times. That big. Is it so popular because of the nostalgia of the 1950s, or did the music of the 1950s offer us the type of country music we really don't hear anymore? I'll let you decide about that, so please pop in your comments down below. The 1950s was the decade that Nashville established itself as the center of the country music world. Before the 1950s, country music was made not only in the South, but many other areas of the U.S., including out in California. Of course, the Grand Ole Opry radio show, broadcasting from that big antenna in Brentwood, Tennessee, is partially responsible for this. It started jamming the country tunes back in 1925 as the WSM Barn Dance, and people everywhere, some for the very first time, were hearing that great music, that great country music all across the USA. But if there is one fellow we should thank for this, that is Paul Cohen. It was his work that made Nashville the recording capital of country music. Cohen started in the record business back in the 1920s, but in the late 40s, while employed by Decca Records, it was his idea to bring everybody together and record them all in Nashville at Castle Recording Studios, located in the old Tulane Hotel on 8th Avenue North and Church Street. Among the first two that recorded in Nashville on the Decca record label were Ernest Tubb and Red Foley. Paul Cohen had a great ear. He really knew how to pick out the best new artists of the 1950s, and he matched them up with the best songs. Cohen signed and produced some of the best new artists of country music, including Kitty Wells, Webb Pierce, Brenda Lee, Patsy Cline, and Bobby Helms. And in 1976, he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. So Paul Cohen provided the foundation of the country music recording industry in the 1950s. What about the music? Well, if you love country music, you should say a big thanks for the great artists of the 1950s because they paved the way for decades of future country artists. The 1950s was a feel-good time in U.S. history. We had just won the Second World War, we were having lots of babies during the baby boom, and the Cold War craziness was still a little way into the future. But country music is poetic, and some of the best songs are not the most positive ones. That is especially true in the early 1950s. The country radio airwaves were dominated by the honky-tonk sounds that provided the foundation of not only country music, but that rockabilly sound that eventually morphed into rock and roll. Those great early honky-tonk artists include Lefty Frizzell, Hank Snow, Kitty Wells, Farron Young, and even the young George Jones. But the king of the honky-tonk was the one and only Hank Williams. It is very hard to measure the exact impact that Hank Williams had on country music. You could use words like groundbreaking and foundational, but his influence was not solely on country music. More than 60 songs have been written just about Hank Williams. Multiple artists from many other genres covered Hank Williams. Some of these artists include Al Green, Elvis Presley, Dean Martin, the Grateful Dead, and even the Rolling Stones. And even Wonder Woman, yes, Wonder Woman, covered the Hank Williams song, I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, and it actually sounds pretty good. The career of Hank Williams sadly only lasted about 6 years. He died young on January 1st, 1953. He was only 29 years old. But the 1950s are also remembered for the ladies of country music that had huge hits and paved the way for so many others. Kitty Wells, a born and bred in Nashville, Tennessee lady was the first woman with a #1 country song. It wasn't God who made Honky Tonk Angels. Yet there was plenty of controversy in the 50s. The Kitty Well song was a response song to the Hank Thompson song, Wild Side of Life, and it set the trend for answer songs that continue to this day. The 1950s gave us teenage country music firecracker Brenda Lee. Nicknamed Little Miss Dynamite, she exploded into the scenes. Her powerhouse vocals and captivating stage presence cemented her as a legend in the genre, and the song Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree made her known to millions worldwide. But as the years of the 1950s passed, the sound started to change from honky-tonk to the more polished sound often labeled the Nashville Sound. It was sort of the contrary to the honky-tonk songs and even the rockabilly sound that was growing at the time. One of the performers of this sound was Patsy Cline. Patsy had a huge hit with Walkin' After Midnight in 1957, and that song established her as one of the greatest voices of all time among any type of music, really. All thanks to the great music made in the 1950s. When you hear a lot of the early Elvis Presley music, to our ears right now, it might sound very country, but not all country fans loved Elvis Presley. My mom, who was a teenager in the 50s, who loved country music, but she was not a huge fan of Elvis. Elvis tried to make it in Nashville, but that didn't work out very well. He appeared once on the Grand Ole Opry back in 1954. He sang Bill Monroe's Blue Moon of Kentucky, but that did not work out too well for him. His hip swaying was more than the folks at the old Grand Ole Opry could handle. The Opry manager at the time suggested that Elvis stick to driving trucks. Well, we were glad Elvis didn't take him up on that one, but there was one person that had the ability to bridge the gap between the hip-swaying sounds of Elvis and the more traditional country music. That man was Johnny Cash. Johnny and Elvis were friends, but Johnny decided to stick with country music. Thank God he did. And the great song that expertly bridged that gap between country and rockabilly was I Walked the Line. Recorded in 1956, it became Johnny's first #1 song. The 1950s were a great decade of country music history. If you want to know more and hear more and have a more in-depth look at country music of the 1950s, please check out the Country Music Time Machine's 1950s playlist, where we run down every single year of the 1950s and enjoy all that great music and that great history. This is Kevin. Let's keep it country. This is the Country Music Time Machine.